Commander Yara Akonko had spent 15 years in deep space, and she thought she had seen everything the universe could throw at her, but she was wrong. The armed escort arrived at her ship without warning, and they did not ask permission to board. And they did not explain why they had come, and they simply told her that the Verith Conclave had summoned her, and that refusal was not an option. She had heard stories about the Verith since childhood, and every spacer had heard them because the Verith were ancient beyond human understanding, and their empire had risen and fallen and risen again across 3 complete galactic cycles, and they controlled something called the Crucible Trials, which determined which species mattered in the galaxy and which species did not. Humanity had applied to enter the Crucible 17 times over the past 200 years, and 17 times they had been rejected, and the reasons were always the same, and the Verith always said that humans were too fragile and too weak and too primitive to survive what the trials demanded. Yara had never expected to see a Verith in person, but now she stood in an obsidian chamber on a station older than human civilization, and she faced the adjudicator. Who would decide her fate? The Verith adjudicator was not like any creature she had ever seen, and its body was made of living crystal that pulsed with light from within, and it towered over her by 3 meters, and it radiated a cold intelligence that made her feel like an insect being examined under glass. Your species lacks the physiological resilience required for the crucible, the adjudicator said, and its voice resonated through the chamber like music played on broken instruments. No human would last beyond the 2nd phase, and this is mathematical certainty and not opinion. Yara looked around the chamber, and she counted representatives from 47 different species, and all of them were watching her, and most of them were looking at her with pity or contempt or amusement, and she realized that she was entertainment to them and nothing more. "Then why did you summon me at all?" she asked, and she kept her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding the adjudicators. Light flickered in a way that might have been surprise or confusion, and it took several seconds before it responded. "Because you applied individually, and you went outside your government's official channels, and this has never occurred in the history of the Crucible, and we were required by ancient law to address your petition in person." Yara allowed herself a small smile because this was exactly what she had been counting on when she had filed her application 6 months ago. "I read your bylaws," she said, "all 12,000 pages of them, and buried in section 7423. There is a clause that states any sapient being may petition for entry, regardless of species-wide approval, and I am a sapient being, and I have petitioned." The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers and sounds that human ears could not properly interpret, and Yara saw that several of the alien delegates were looking at her differently now, and the pity in some of their eyes had been replaced by something else. A massive creature stepped forward from the crowd, and Yara recognized it as a Dazari from the briefing files she had studied, and the Dazari were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And this one stood over 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and armor plating that grew from its own skin, and it laughed at her, and the sound was like boulders grinding together. "Let the little mammal try," the Dazari said. "It will be entertaining to watch her break apart in the first phase, and her screams will amuse us during the long cycles of competition." The adjudicator pulsed with light as it processed and calculated, and Yara wondered if it was looking for a legal way to reject her. But she had spent 3 years studying the Crucible's laws, and she knew there was no way out for them. "Your petition is approved," the adjudicator finally said, and Yara heard something in its voice that might have been cruel amusement. "You have 30 cycles to prepare for trials that have claimed thousands of participants across 11,000 years, and we will provide you with standard accommodation and basic information, but nothing more." Yara nodded, and she did not let her fear show on her face, even though she knew that she had just agreed to what most would consider a death sentence. As she turned to leave the chamber, a young alien intercepted her, and this one was it. Keth, with smooth blue skin and wide black eyes that seemed to hold genuine concern, and it spoke to her in a whisper that the others could not hear. "You should know something," the cat said. "The Crucible has existed for 11,000 years, and in all that time, no human has ever competed, and we always assumed this was because your kind were wise enough to understand their limits and to stay away. Thank you for the warning," Yara said, and she meant it sincerely because kindness from strangers was rare in the galaxy. "I do not understand why you would do this," the Keth continued. "You cannot win and you will suffer greatly, and your death will prove nothing except what everyone already believes about humanity." Yara looked at the young diplomat for a long moment, and she considered telling it the truth, but she decided against it because some secrets needed to stay secret for now. "Maybe I am just stubborn," she said. "Humans are famous for that, you know." She walked away from the Keth, and she walked away from the chamber full of creatures who saw her as nothing more than a curiosity, and she returned to her quarters on the station, where armed guards would watch her every move for the next 30 cycles. Only when she was alone did she allow herself to access the encrypted files she had hidden in her neural implant, and she read again the documents she had discovered buried in Earth's oldest colonial archives project. Prometheus was the name on the file, and it was dated 300 years ago, and it was classified at the highest levels that humanity possessed, and it contained information that could shake the foundations of galactic politics. 12 humans had entered the Crucible before her, and their names had been erased from every official record, and their existence had been denied by the Vareth and by Earth's own government, and they had been forgotten by everyone. But someone had kept records, and someone had hidden the truth, and now Yara knew what no one else knew, and she knew that she was not the first human to stand where she was standing. She was the 13th, and she intended to find out what had happened to the 12 who came before her, and why the galaxy had worked so hard to pretend they had never existed. The Vareth claimed no human could survive the Crucible, but Yara now knew that was a lie, and the only question that mattered was what they were trying to hide and how far they would go to keep hiding it. She had 30 cycles to prepare and 30 cycles to investigate, and 30 cycles to turn herself into something the galaxy had never seen before, a human who would not break, a human who would not be erased, a human who would make them remember. The training facility was carved into an asteroid that floated in neutral space, far from any government's control, and Yara arrived there, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the secrets hidden in her mind. Her preparation cell was small, and bare with a bed that was too hard, and lights that never fully dimmed, and cameras that watched her every moment of every day, and she knew that the Vareth were studying her and looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The other competitors arrived over the following days, and Yara watched them from a distance, and she memorized everything she could about each one, because knowledge was the only advantage she would ever have. There were 17 participants from 12 different species, and every single one of them had been designed by evolution or engineering to survive in ways that made human biology look like a joke. The Zari who had mocked her in the chamber was named Krath, and he could survive in the vacuum of space for hours without protection, and his armored skin could stop projectiles that would tear through steel, and his 4 arms could crush stone into powder. The Morik were shapeless things that could regenerate from wounds that would kill any other creature, and Yara watched one of them lose an arm during a training exercise and grow it back within the hour, as if nothing had happened. The Ven were the strangest of all, because they existed partially in something called subspace, and they could phase through solid matter like ghosts, and they could not be touched or hurt by physical means. There was even a crystalline entity competing, and it was a distant cousin of the Vareth adjudicators themselves, and it did not need food or water or air or sleep, and it simply existed in perfect patience, waiting for challenges that could not harm it. And then there was Yara, who stood 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds, and who needed oxygen to breathe and water. to drink and food to eat and sleep to function, and who could be killed by a fall from a moderate height or a temperature change of a few dozen degrees. The other competitors did not bother to learn her name, and they did not see her as a threat. And they barely acknowledged her existence at all, and Yara was grateful for this because it gave her time to work. She spent her preparation cycles studying, and she read everything she could find about the Crucible trials, and the records stretched back 11,000 years, and they contained details about thousands of challenges and millions of competitors, and the data was overwhelming, but Yara had always been good at finding patterns. More importantly, she learned to see what was not there. The Crucible's official records had gaps and holes and inconsistencies that most people would never notice. And Yara noticed them because she was looking for them, and she knew they had to exist. There were trials where the participant lists did not match the survivor counts, and phases where data had been marked as corrupted or lost to archival decay, and small errors that painted a larger picture when you put them all together. On her 15th cycle of preparation, Yara did something that could have gotten her killed. She broke into the restricted historical archive. The security systems were advanced by most standards, but they were laughable by human standards because the Varth had designed them to stop species that thought in predictable patterns, and humans did not think in predictable patterns, and humans were very good at finding ways into places they were not supposed to be. She found what she was looking for in a file that had been marked for deletion 300 years ago, but had never actually been deleted because bureaucracies were the same everywhere in the galaxy. Project Prometheus with 12 participants and a status marked as nullified. Nullified was a word the Varith used when they wanted something to stop existing, and it was worse than classified and worse than erased, and it meant that the very concept of the thing was supposed to be removed from reality. But the Varith were obsessive archivists, and they could not bring themselves to actually destroy data, even when they claimed to have done so. And the deletion order existed, which meant the original files existed somewhere too. It took Yara 4 more cycles of careful searching and hacking and bribing and lying, but she found them. 12 names and 12 faces stared at her from files that should not have existed, and they were military officers and scientists and engineers. And they had been the best humanity had to offer 300 years ago. They had been sent in secret to prove that humans deserved a place at the galactic table, and their mission had been hidden from the public because failure would have been humiliating and success would have changed everything. 11 of them had died across the 6 phases of the Crucible, and the files contained details of their deaths, and they were horrible and creative and designed to teach the Varith everything they needed to know about how to break a human being. But the 12th name was different. Major Esperanza Vega had not died in the trials, and she had completed 5 of the 6 phases, and she had been winning. And she had been on track to become the first human to complete the Crucible, and then the records simply stopped. Her file said she had withdrawn due to medical emergency, and there were no further details and no explanation and no record of what had happened after that moment. According to official records, Esperanza Vega had never returned to Earth, and she had never been seen again, and she had simply vanished as if she had never existed at all. Yara stared at the woman's face in the old photograph, and she saw determination in those eyes, and she saw strength, and she saw someone who would not have given up easily. Something had happened to Major Vega, and something had happened to all 12 of the project. Prometheus volunteers and the galaxy had worked very hard to make sure no one would ever know about it. But now Yara knew. She knew that humans had competed in the Crucible. The 4, and she knew that one of them had almost won, and she knew that someone or something had stopped her and erased her from history. The question was why, and the question was how, and the question was whether the same thing would happen to Yara. When she got too close to success, she copied everything she had found onto secure storage, hidden in places the Varith would never think to look, and she covered her tracks as best she could, and she returned to her cell, and she lay in her uncomfortable bed, and she thought about what she had learned. 12 humans had tried, and 11 had fallen, and 1 had disappeared, and now Yara was the 13th, and she had 10 cycles left before the trials began. She would honor their memory by succeeding where they had failed, and she would find out what had happened to Esperanza Vega, and she would make sure that this time the truth could not be erased. The Verith had claimed no human would last in the Crucible, and they had lied, and the lie had worked for 300 years, but lies only work as long as people believe them. Yara did not believe anymore, and soon the galaxy would not believe either. The first phase of the Crucible was called the Drowning Gardens, and Yara understood why the moment she was dropped into it. The environment was an artificial ecosystem that stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, and it was beautiful in a deadly way, with towering plants that glowed in colors human eyes could barely process, and pools of liquid that shimmered with strange light, and floating platforms that drifted through the air like lazy clouds. But the air itself was the enemy. Most of the atmosphere was toxic to oxygen-breathing creatures, and the breathable pockets existed like islands, scattered across an ocean of poison, and the environmental control systems actively moved these pockets around to make survival as difficult as possible. The Dasari named Krath laughed when the phase began, and his voice came through the communication channel that allowed competitors to hear each other. I give the human 2 hours before she chokes on her own weakness. Yara did not respond because she was too busy surviving. She had read 847 years of trial records during her preparation, and she had noticed something that no one else seemed to have noticed, and the Drowning Gardens had a pattern. Every 11 minutes, the environmental control AI recalculated the distribution of atmospheric pockets based on the current positions of all participants, and it used this calculation to maximize difficulty for each competitor. So Yara never stayed in one position long enough to be calculated. She moved constantly, and she moved unpredictably, and she used the 11-minute windows to sprint from one safe zone to another before the AI could track her and adjust, and she treated the whole thing like a game of chase against a computer that was smarter than her, but slower to react. She lasted 9 hours in an environment designed to kill her in 2, and she emerged from the first phase exhausted and shaking, but alive, 9th place out of 17 competitors, with 3 having fallen to the toxic atmosphere. The Zari looked at her with something other than contempt for the first time, and she saw calculation in his eyes as he reassessed what she might be capable of. The second phase was called the calculation spiral, and it was a maze that reconfigured itself based on the solutions that competitors attempted. Most species tried to solve it through brute force, and they used their superior memories and processing speeds to map the maze and find the correct path, but the maze learned from every attempt, and it grew more complex. With each solution tried, the Morag were eliminated here because their regeneration meant nothing against the puzzle that could not be wounded. And the Ven lost 3 of their number when the maze learned to anticipate their phasing patterns. Yara spent 3 days inside the calculation spiral, and she did not try to solve it at all. Instead, she studied it, and she watched how it reconfigured. And she noticed that one section had a mechanical flaw that created a 17-second delay between solution attempts and actual reconfiguration. On her 4th day, she walked through that section while the maze was still thinking about what to do, and she emerged on the other side, having solved nothing but having passed anyway. 7th place with 2 more competitors eliminated. The Keth diplomat found her after the second phase, and he looked at her with confusion and something that might have been respect. You did not solve the maze, he said. No one has ever passed the calculation spiral without solving it. I did not need to solve it, Yara replied. I only needed to get through it. That is not how the trial is supposed to work. Then maybe the trial should have been designed better. The 3rd phase was simply called pressure, and there was no strategy that could help her here, and no pattern she could exploit and no flaw she could find. They sealed each competitor in an individual chamber, and they increased gravity until something broke, and the Varth wanted to see what each species would sacrifice first and whether it would be mobility or consciousness or organ function or life itself. The Thesari lasted until 6.4 standard gravities before his armor cracked and he yielded. The crystalline entity did not feel pressure at all, and it simply waited in perfect stillness until the phase ended. Yara felt every moment of it at 4.7 gravities. Her bones began to crack and she heard them snapping inside her body like dry twigs, and the pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced. At 5.2 gravities, she lost feeling in her arms and legs, and she could no longer move, and she lay on the floor of the chamber like a broken doll. At 5.8 gravities, blood vessels burst in her eyes, and her heart struggled to push blood uphill to her brain, and darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and she knew that she was dying. She did not yield. She woke up in a medical bay with a cath physician standing over her and regenerative nanits working through her bloodstream to repair damage that should have killed her. "You should have yielded," the physician said. "All other competitors yielded before sustaining permanent damage, and you have broken 47 bones and ruptured internal organs, and you will need days to recover. What is my placement?" Yara asked through teeth that were still being regrown. "Fourth place." She almost laughed, but it hurt too much. "You lasted longer than participants whose biology should have given them hours more tolerance." The physician continued. "The adjudicators are discussing whether to review the phase parameters. Because I did too well. Because you did not yield." The physician's voice dropped to a whisper. "No human has ever refused to yield in the pressure phase, and the Vareth do not understand this, and it frightens them." Yara smiled even though it sent pain shooting through her reconstructed jaw. "Good," she said. "They should be frightened." She lay in the medical bay, and she let the nanits do their work, and she thought about the phases still to come, and she thought about Esperanza Vega, who had made it through 5 phases before something stopped her 4th place with 3 phases remaining. And Vareth were already afraid of her. She was going to make them more afraid. She was going to make them remember what humans could do when they refused to accept the impossible, and then she was going to find out what they had done to the 12 who came before her, and she was going to make them answer for it. The night before the 4th phase, a visitor came to Yara's recovery cell, and the guards did not stop her, and the security systems did not alert anyone, and she simply appeared as if she had always been there. The woman was old by human standards, with silver hair that fell past her shoulders and skin that had been weathered by centuries of exposure to recycled air and artificial light. And she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been rebuilt and repaired and replaced more times than anyone could count. She sat down in the chair beside Yara's bed, and she studied the younger woman with eyes that had seen too much and survived too long. "Commander Okonkwo," the woman said, "my name is Esperanza Vega, and I believe you have been looking for me." Yara tried to sit up, but her body was still too damaged from the pressure phase, and she could only turn her head to look at the legend she had been hunting. "You are supposed to be dead," Yara said, "or erased or nullified, or whatever word the Vareth use when they want someone to stop existing. Nullified is the word they prefer, because it sounds more official and less like murder," Vega said. "But I am neither dead nor erased, and I am simply old and tired and very patient. How are you here, and how did you get past the security?" "I have been here for 300 years, Commander, and I know this station better than the Vareth themselves know it, and there are places in these walls that no one has looked at in centuries, because everyone assumes someone else is watching." Yara processed this information, and she realized that Esperanza Vega had been hiding in plain sight for 300 years and waiting for something that only she understood. "I have watched your progress," Vega continued. "You are doing better than we did and better than I did at this stage, and you have a chance that none of us ever had. What happened to you and what happened to the others, and why did they erase you? From history. Vega was silent for a long moment, and something passed across her face that might have been pain, or might have been memory, or might have been both. I was winning, she finally said. I had completed 5 phases, and I was on track to complete the 6th, and the Varth could not find a legal way to stop me, and their own laws were going to force them to acknowledge that a human had succeeded. So they cheated. They created a 7th phase. Vega's voice was flat and cold. A phase that had never existed before and would never exist again, and it was designed specifically for me, and specifically to exploit everything the Varth had learned about human psychology. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. They put me in isolation, and they took away all light and all sound and all sensation, and they kept me there. And they told me that no one was coming, and that I had been forgotten, and that humanity had abandoned me. How long? 9 years. Yara felt something cold settle in her chest because she could not imagine surviving 9 days of that kind of treatment, let alone 9 years. I broke eventually, Vega said. Everyone breaks eventually, and that is what they were trying to prove. And when I finally yielded, they released me, but they did not send me home, and they kept me here where they could watch me and make sure. I never told anyone what had happened. Why did you not escape, and why did you not send a message? Because they made me understand something. Vega leaned forward, and her old eyes burned with an intensity that 3 centuries had not dimmed. The Crucible is not a test, Commander, and it was never meant to be a test, and it is a filter designed to make sure that certain species never rise to challenge the established order. And humanity is one of those species. Humanity frightens them more than any other species they have ever encountered. Vega smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Not because we are strong or fast or resilient, because we are none of those things, and every competitor you have faced is superior to you in every physical measurement. Then what frightens them? We adapt, Vega said. We look at systems designed to destroy us, and we ask how we can destroy them instead. And we do not accept limits, and we do not yield when yielding is the logical choice, and we will break ourselves against impossible walls until the walls fall down or we die trying. That sounds like stubbornness. It is more than stubbornness, and it is something the Varth do not have a word for because they have never encountered it before. Vega reached into her coat and pulled out a small data chip. This contains everything I learned during my time here, and everything they tried to hide, and the names of the 11 who fell, and how they really died. How they really died. Not all of them died in the trials, Commander, and some of them were winning and some of them were helped along by accidents and equipment failures, and the Varth are very good at making murder look like inevitability. Yara took the chip, and she felt the weight of it in her hand, and she understood that she was holding 300 years of secrets that someone had died to protect. How do I win? She asked. How do I beat a system designed to make sure I cannot win? You do not win by passing their tests, Vega said. You win by making them admit that the tests were never fair, and you win by forcing them to choose between letting you succeed and letting the galaxy know what they have done. When will I know that the moment has come? When they are more afraid of you finishing than they are of the galaxy knowing their crimes. Vega stood and she moved toward the door. One more thing, Commander, and this is important. What is it? The 4th phase is called persistence, and the Varth think it is a test of endurance, and they are wrong, and it is actually a test of spite. Vega paused at the threshold, and she looked back at Yara with something that might have been hope for the first time in 300 years. Humans have more spite than any species in the galaxy, Commander, and it is our finest quality, and it is the thing that will carry you through when everything else fails. What if spite is not enough? Then you will die, and they will erase you, and everything will continue as it has for 11,000 years. Vega shrugged. but I do not think that will happen, because I have watched you, and I have seen what you are made of, and I think the Vareth have finally met someone they cannot break." She disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, and Yara was alone again with a data chip full of secrets and a body full of pain, and a heart full of something that burned hotter than fear. Spite, she thought, she had plenty of that to spare, and tomorrow she would show the Vareth exactly how much. The fourth phase began with darkness and silence and nothing else. They called it persistence, and they dropped each competitor into an environment designed specifically to break their species in ways that could not be fought or resisted or outsmarted. For the Dasari, it was confinement in a space so small that his massive body could not move, and his armored strength was useless, and his warrior pride became his enemy. For the Morat, it was wounds that would not heal and damage that their regeneration could not repair, and they learned for the first time what it felt like to be permanently broken. For the Ven, it was a space where subspace did not exist, and they were trapped in solid reality with no way to escape and no way to phase through. The walls that imprisoned them for Yara, it was all of these things at once and more. The space was tight enough that she could not stand and dark enough that she could not see her hand in front of her face, and silent enough that she could hear her own heartbeat and the sound of her own blood moving through her veins. And there was a voice. The voice was artificial and patient and reasonable, and it spoke to her constantly, and it never stopped, and it told her all the reasons why she should give up. "Your species is not designed for this," the voice said on the first day. "You are fragile and weak and temporary, and your body is already failing, and your mind will follow soon, and you should yield now before the pain becomes unbearable." She did not yield. Your ancestors knew their place in the galaxy, the voice said on the third day. They understood that some trials are not meant to be won, and some heights are not meant to be climbed, and some doors are not meant to be opened. And you should accept this truth as they did. She did not yield. You are alone. The voice said on the seventh day, "No human has ever been where you are now, and no human ever will be again, and your government has forgotten you, and your people have moved on, and no one is waiting for you to return, and no one will notice when you disappear, and you should yield now and let go of this pointless struggle." She did not yield. On the 12th day, something changed inside her, and the fear and the pain and the exhaustion all burned away, and what was left was something harder and colder and more dangerous than anything the Vareth had anticipated. She started talking back. "Tell me about Major Vega," she said into the darkness. "Tell me about the woman who almost beat you 300 years ago." The voice was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again, there was something different in its tone. "That designation is not recognized in our records. Tell me about Project Prometheus and the 12 humans who competed in the Crucible and were erased from history because they proved that your tests could be beaten. That data has been nullified and does not exist. Data does not nullify, and it does not disappear, and it only hides, and you are hiding something, and I know what it is." She laughed, and the sound echoed in the tiny space, and it was not a sane sound, but sanity was a luxury she could no longer afford. "You are afraid of me," she said, "the Vareth and the Conclave. And all of you are afraid because you know what I represent, and you know what it means if I succeed. Your psychological state is deteriorating as expected, and this is a normal part of the phase, and you should yield now before permanent damage occurs." "Who fell before me?" She spoke the words like a weapon, and she felt the darkness flinch around her. "Give me their names and the real names, and the ones you erased, and the ones you murdered, and the ones you buried so deep that you thought no one would ever find them." The voice did not respond, so Yara spoke the names herself. Lieutenant Commander David Oilerin, who died in the second phase when his oxygen supply mysteriously failed at a critical moment. Captain Yuki Tanaka, who died in the third phase when the gravity controls exceeded safe parameters by 300%. Sergeant Major Ahmed, Hassan, who died in the fourth phase when the isolation chamber flooded with toxic gas, while the safety systems were mysteriously offline. She spoke all 11 names, and she told the darkness how each of them had died, and she recited the details from the files that Esperanza Vega had given her, and she made the artificial voice listen to every word. "You killed them because they were winning," she said. "You erased them because you could not let the galaxy know that humans could pass your precious trials, and you kept Major Vega prisoner for 300 years because she knew too much, and you are going to do the same thing to me." The darkness was silent. "But you made a mistake," Yara continued. "You let me get this far, and you let me find the truth, and you let me prepare for this moment. And while you were testing my endurance, I was uploading everything to every communication channel I could reach." She smiled even though no one could see it. "The galaxy knows now, and every species that is watching these trials has received the complete records of Project Prometheus, and they know the names of the humans you murdered, and they know what you did to Esperanza Vega, and they know that you have been lying for 300 years. The fourth phase ended 37 seconds later. The chamber opened and light flooded in, and Yara crawled out on hands and knees because her legs would not hold her weight, and she found herself in a room filled with Varith adjudicators. Not one but 17 of them, and their crystalline bodies pulsed with colors she had never seen before, and the light they gave off was angry and afraid. The other competitors stood at the edges of the chamber, and they watched her with expressions she could not read, and the Thesari was there, and the Keth diplomat was there, and dozens of others who had come to see what would happen next. Commander Okonkwo, the lead adjudicator, said, and his voice was a thunderstorm of barely controlled fury. "You have accessed restricted archives and distributed classified information to external networks and violated 17 protocols of the Crucible trials." Yara stood on broken legs with blood running down her face, and she looked up at the ancient beings who had controlled the galaxy's gates for 11,000 years. "I have done what humans do," she said. "I have adapted. These violations constitute grounds for immediate disqualification and permanent nullification. Then nullify me like you nullified the others, and see how well that works when the whole galaxy is watching." Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the other competitors checked their personal systems and found the data packets she had transmitted during the fourth phase, and they saw the names in the faces and the evidence of 300 years of lies. "You can erase me," Yara said, "but you cannot erase them twice, and the truth is out, and everyone knows what you did, and everyone knows why you did it, and everyone knows that you have been cheating since the beginning." She stepped forward into the light of 17 ancient crystalline beings. "You claim no human would last in the Crucible, and you were so confident that you said it to my face on the first day, and you believed it because you had made sure it was true, and you had killed everyone who proved otherwise." She raised her head, and she met the adjudicator's gaze with eyes that had survived 12 days of darkness. "So tell me now, in front of all these witnesses and in front of the whole galaxy that is watching this moment, who fell before me?" The chamber was absolutely silent, and then the Keth diplomat began to applaud. The sound was soft at first, but it was joined by others, and then more, and the Zari brought his 4 hands together with a crack like thunder, and a dozen species who had watched humanity struggle and suffer and refused to break showed their respect in ways that crossed every cultural boundary. The lead adjudicator's light flickered through colors that might have been processing or calculating or simply admitting defeat. "The Crucible will be reviewed," it finally said. "Commander Okonkwo's performance in the first 4 phases stands, and the 5th and 6th phases will be conducted under full galactic observation with independent monitors present. And the humans who came before me." Another long pause. "Their names will be restored to official records, and their fates will be acknowledged and investigated." Yara nodded slowly because it was not justice, and it was not enough, but it was a beginning. And beginnings were all anyone could ask for. As the Keth medical team helped her from the chamber, the Thesari fell into step beside her. "You are completely insane," he said. "No rational species challenges the Verith directly, and no rational individual risks nullification for people who died centuries before they were born." "Probably," Yara agreed. "You still have 2 more phases, and they are going to be designed by beings who now hate you personally and want to watch you fail." "I know," the Thesari made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been respect, or might have been both. "I am changing my wager," he said. "I think you might actually win this thing." Yara thought about Esperanza Vega watching from somewhere in the station, and finally seeing the vindication she had waited 300 years to witness. She thought about 11 names that would finally be remembered and honored and mourned. She thought about every human who would come after her and who would enter these trials knowing that the path had been walked before, and that the lies had been exposed, and that the galaxy knew what humanity could do. "I already have," she said, and she meant it, because victory was not just about crossing a finish line. And victory was not just about completing 6 phases and earning a seat at the Galactic